of the first things the Europeans did upon arriving in America was to start chopping down trees. At first, they did this to make clearings for their cabins, gardens, get firewood, have the materials for those cabins. But it wasn't long before they started clear-cutting large tracts of forest, making farms, and harvesting the lumber. The Europeans loved the lumber, the forest not so much. This practice continued into the early 20th century. The result of this was that soil was pouring into the waterways, silt flowing downstream, changing the character of those waterways rather drastically, and also providing a building material as the city was built, the city of Philadelphia. The Delaware River is a completely different river than the one William Penn sailed up. In 1684, William Penn resolved the problem that he had with riverfront access. The people who owned the waterfront properties wanted to use them to build a port. They wanted to construct wharves, warehouses, and so on, so that goods could be brought into the city and leave it. The way he resolved this was to have a set of steps built on each of the minor roads leading down to the Delaware River. This is the last surviving staircase from that era. It's the Wood Street Steps. And it is a great place to illustrate how much the waterfront has changed since 1684. The Wood Street Steps went from Front Street down to Water Street, which at that time was just a dirt track along the beach. Water Street is still there, cobblestone now, but the beach is gone, and the waterfront itself is a considerable distance away, as you can see from looking at the pier face across the way there. So the citizens of Philadelphia got their steps and access to the water, and the business people got a place to do business. Everyone was happy for a while. Business prospered, boomed even. And it wasn't too long before the business was too big for the facilities available. They had a serious infrastructure problem. No one was better positioned to recognize this than Stephen Girard. Girard is rather well known. He has a street named after him in Philadelphia, rather major one, Girard College. He funded the War of 1812. He was a man of means and a merchant. He left a bequest to the city to improve the port by building Delaware Avenue to serve that port. So the old dirt track that was Water Street was expanded upon and became Delaware Avenue. That avenue was built on the top of the piers and shipyards that were along the river. The river itself was bulkheaded, new piers were built, usually open piers or with sheds. In time, the avenue would be widened. That happened a couple of times. As railroads came in, a rail line would go down the middle of the avenue, and for quite some time, that was adequate. The port would continue to do well, and in time, that would have to get expanded, but we'll do that later. So Delaware Avenue was built between 1834 and 1845. One of the places that survives that it was built over the top of is the West Shipyard, which is actually located near the Wood Street Steps. It is now a vacant lot. There's a stalled construction project happened there. It's been stalled for a couple of years. But in the 1980s, there was an archaeological dig done there under a parking lot. And the shipways that were used to haul ships in and out of the river were found. And they give you an idea of like the slope of the beach, the extent of the beach at that time. Those shipways and piers have been covered over, and the idea is that somewhere down the road they will be showcased as part of whatever development project actually does go forward there. About 50 yards behind me was Windmill Island. It's basically where that tugboat is. William Penn came to the city. His surveyor, Thomas Home, characterized the islands as just piles of mud in the river. In the 1740s, there was enough island there to build a windmill on for grinding grist. In the 1820s, that island was about 25 acres and was used as a resort. Tended to be a family resort, but I think because it was so close to where all the sailors were hanging out, that kind of slipped off the straight and narrow from time to time. In 1838, the island was split in half. It became Windmill Island and Smith Island. People seem to use the names interchangeably, though. The channel that was run through it was so that the ferries had a direct route to Camden. In 1877, the Sanitarium Association of Philadelphia set up a facility for kids. Kids and their mothers would go out to the island by steamboat. These were kids who were suffering from cholera or tuberculosis. The island was seen as a healthy place with the summer breezes, a little cooler than the city. Silt had a lot to do with the formation of this island and with its demise. As the shoreline got closer and closer to the island and the island increased in size, there was less and less room for the ship channel. The ships were also getting bigger and the piers needed to be longer. So for the port to grow, the island had to be dredged out of existence. This happened between 1893 and 1897 and brought about the modern port, or the port as we see it today for the most part. In 1777, the British were held off for 60 days by the American Revolutionary Forces. It's a remarkable achievement. Because of that battle, a lot of maps were drawn of this area, and we have a pretty clear idea of what it looked like in the 18th century. And we can compare those maps to contemporary ones to see how much the river has changed because of silt, because of dredging. Those airplanes are there because when Windmill Island was dredged, it was deposited on Hog Island just downriver from here, making it high enough to support first the largest shipyard in the world at the end of World War I, and later the Philadelphia International Airport. So when you're taking off or landing in Philadelphia, you're doing it from the top of two islands, one stacked on top of the other. Hog Island was originally a marsh, which was diked, made into a meadow, and then later on in the late 19th century, it acquired Windmill Island. One of the biggest changes that most readily apparent from someone standing on the shore is how much deeper and wider the channel is, allowing the passage of oil barges, container ships, car carriers, bulkers, everything really. Behind me is what is now the Naval Reserve Basin at Philadelphia Shipyard. This was once the channel that separated League Island from Philadelphia proper. The channel was dredged to accommodate naval vessels, and the dredged spoils were placed on the Delaware River side of the island to build a base. This all happened between 1891 and 1897 when the shipyard was shifted from Federal Street in South Philadelphia down here to League Island. On the other side of Broad Street, the channel was left until 1926 when it was filled in to build an airfield, Muston Field. At that time, the Navy was building airplanes here and needed a landing strip for testing them. To look at it now, solid looking houses and so on, you would never know that you would be standing knee deep in mud and water right here. After Windmill Island was dredged away and the channel evened out, there was another phase to the project, which was to build new modern piers. This took place in the 1920s. Those piers remained useful from the 20s up well into the 1960s. After that, containerization took over, and piers designed to handle breakbulk cargo were no longer useful. Container ship pulls up alongside a pier, big crane comes out, lifts the container ashore, and then there's this whole process for getting those containers on trucks and trains. The old way was to swing individual pieces of cargo from ship to shore and then manhandle it onto a train or into a truck. Not as efficient. A lot of the piers have fallen into disuse, at least commercially. Piers 3 and 5 have become condominiums, so I guess that says it all. In 1995, you could bring in a ship that had a draft of 18 feet right here. So since that time, since 1995, the entire length of the pier has filled in at 18 feet. That's a lot of silt, and that's also happened for several piers up. When ships stop coming and going from a pier, it rapidly fills in. Deepening the river has been an ongoing thing. 24 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, and most recently 45 feet, at least up to the Walt Whitman Bridge, to accommodate ever larger ships. There was a time when you designed a ship to get into the harbor that it was going to. Now you design the harbor to accommodate the ship. Silt is clearly flowing downriver at a great rate, and the reason for that is not deforestation, which was the original cause, but development. Developers do not send water back into the aquifer. They send it directly into whatever the closest tributary is, and then it's downstream. Anything that's on the street, roof, lawn, is going into the creek and down the river. In the process, the creeks are tending to flood, so big torrents of water rush down them whenever there's a significant rain, carving out the soil along their banks and taking it downstream. And in any individual place, that doesn't seem like a lot of soil, but when you take the whole watershed and aggregate, it is a lot. There is an element of absurdity to this. You know, the developers are putting silt into the water upstream, and the port operators are taking it out downstream. And one would think that they'd figure out, you know, the left hand would know what the right was doing, and they just wouldn't put it into the system in the first place. They would spend that dredging money on a healthy aquifer. A guy can hope. Silt caught in the back eddies or under the piers that have no commercial value just stays where it lands, gradually building up. If a site does have commercial value, then it gets dredged. Those dredge spoils usually go to a containment facility, especially if they are polluted. This was not always true. It's piled willy-nilly all along the river in the past, but now if it's polluted, it goes to a containment facility, which is a diked off area with some provision for the water to drain off, and there it is placed and gradually becomes solid ground. If it is clean, it could go to a marsh reclamation project. If it is sand, it could go to a beach reclamation project. This is improvement. But still, at its heart, dredging is harmful. It is scraping away habitat and burying habitat, essentially. But silt coming down the river is a natural process. It's part of geology. It's how mountain ranges get worn down. The problem is that it's happening at a much more rapid rate than it would as a natural process right now because of our activities. We are changing the characteristics of the river, and that brings with it unintended consequences. More vulnerable to storm surges, for example. You have a channelization thing going on, which actually tends to make flooding worse. There's nothing interrupting that flow. Most recently, Hurricane Ida came ashore in the Gulf of Mexico and wound up stalled for a brief time over the Delaware watershed and caused enormous flooding in this region. That would be an unintended consequence of our runoff policies. There are regulations, but a healthy environment is not a bedrock principle of our society, and it should be. A healthy environment means healthy people. We are motivated by profit, and regulations about the environment are just seen as obstacles to attaining that profit. And this has been built into our society, at least since we've gotten to this continent, and probably longer. If a healthy environment were a constitutional right, and it was agreed upon by everyone that that was the first priority, which it should be, I think we might have a very different situation. Incidentally, William Penn's access to the Philadelphia waterfront only lasted for a few years. The residents of Philadelphia now are completely walled off from the river. God forbid you'd fall in, there's nowhere to crawl out. And there are tides and so on. This is mainly a consequence of our changes to the waterways. We are providing access in the form of trails, places where you can look at the river, but nowhere where you can get into it safely unless you go well up or downstream from the city.